Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the most important freshmen for all of the Big Ten contenders. Some big time guys out there, Jeremiah Smith and Dylan Raiola leading the way, but tons of other guys that you definitely should watch. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, definitely check out that segment. But let's get into a Hot Take Thursday, and this one's around Blue Bloods because it's that time of year when everyone's just itching for someone to hit someone. Everyone just wants football back so bad that the blue blood conversation comes out, and this one happened around Oregon for whatever reason, because Oregon is on a tear. They're doing an incredible job in recruiting. They have built up a really, really good program under Dan Lanning. They're also a million miles away from being a blue blood. That's just the plain truth of it, but at the end of the day, it is an interesting conversation. So let's get into this, and let's start with my criteria. Let's start with who I think is a blue blood in this world of college football and who I think isn't. And my list is pretty simple. Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame. I don't think I need to explain those. I'll be totally honest with you. Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma have been dominant for quite some time. Michigan is the leader in wins all time. I don't think I have to answer that one. And then Notre Dame, one of the most historic programs in the entirety of college football. That one's a layup to me, no question. Then you get into the guys that are teetering just a little bit. Texas, obviously, there was a lot of momentum to pull them out of this group as they struggled the last, 10, 14 years. But I think this last year might have just saved them for a little bit. I do think that was a huge year for them to prove that they're still in that conversation. They can still get themselves up to the level of the elite in the sport. So I do think Texas is safe for quite some time here. Nebraska is the one that I think is teetering probably the most on this one. But at the end of the day, when you dominate the sport for a good 35, 40 years, you're a blue blood in this sport. I understand it was quite some time ago, but it doesn't change that they controlled this sport for quite some time behind Tommy Frazier and some other just remarkable players. And then USC had one of the craziest runs in the 2000s and has been a team that has popped up a number of different times throughout history and been the talk of the town for quite some time. So those are the 8 teams as I see it. I understand, you do have some teams that are right on the outside looking in that could absolutely be argued to be in. And I'll kind of get into some of those teams here in a second. But overall, I think those are the teams that I got. I think those are the teams that have defined college football throughout generations, have, a history that precedes them as one of the most well-known. Everything goes in the direction of those programs. We can argue all night and day about those last 3 teams or the couple of teams that should be in but aren't. But at the end of the day, what does it matter? I'll be totally honest. Every time this conversation comes up, I kind of roll my eyes because I fully understand that being a blue blood is a very cool thing. It's an awesome thing for a team and a fan base to say, we're a team that defines college football. We're a team that has been around for so long and has been the class of the sport for X number of years. That's a really cool thing, and I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing it doesn't mean anything in current college football. I think when you talk about Alabama, when they walked in, when Nick Saban walked in, I think you could make the argument that Alabama was a blue blood, but they solidified themselves over the last couple of years. So who's the next team that can possibly do that? And I think when you talk about that, when you talk about who's the next team that can kind of bring themselves into that group, it's Georgia. There's no two ways about that. What Kirby Smart is building down there is definitely a team that could jump into this conversation, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they're a blue blood or they're not right now. They are the best program in college football. Any of the 8 that I just said are blue bloods in the sport would trade their situation for Georgia's right now because it's the best situation in the country. They have absolutely everything going in the right direction, and they're not slowing down. In fact, I would argue they're speeding up. I've said it on here before. I think this 24 team is the best team that Kirby Smart has ever had. So this team is terrifying, and the idea that them being or not being a blue blood changes anything about what this program is and will be going forward is just insane to me. I'll be totally honest, but let's get to the team that started this argument, which was Oregon. And I said earlier, they're miles away. Having no national titles makes this not even a conversation. I really like Oregon. I think they are a program that is building up an incredible next 10 years and will be someone that maybe you can kick them around in those conversations coming forward. But as of right now, they are just miles away from being in that group. It doesn't change that half of that group would change what they are doing for what Oregon's doing and would take what their situation, throw it out the window, and take Oregon's, because Oregon's in a better situation than a ton of those teams for the next 5-10 years. So I don't really get the argument that everyone has. I understand that it's really, really fun to, go after some big time teams and say, well, we're a blue blood and you're not. So that's the card that we hold over you. But I'll be totally honest with you. If you're using the fact that your team is a blue blood in a conversation or an argument in college football, you've lost. I'll just be totally honest with you. You've lost that conversation. You might as well move on to the next one, because it doesn't mean anything. If you're not winning games in the present, no one cares what you did in 1980. It's not to say that we shouldn't celebrate those teams and recognize those teams for what they are, because they are the teams that define college football in so many different ways, and they are the teams that have stood the test of time. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change what's happening right now on the field, and that would be Oregon tearing apart a team like USC, or I'm blanking here, Georgia tearing apart a team like Texas or a team like Bama. It doesn't matter, is mainly the point that I'm making. But at the end of the day, being a blue blood can be fun. There's no two ways about that. And there are certain benefits that do come with it. I do think there is a certain lean, a certain bias towards those teams because they are so important in the sport, and because, let's be honest, they bring in a ton of money when they are on TV. They are huge, huge entities, and it definitely does make for some really fun matchups. When Texas and Michigan play this year, it's going to be really special, because watching those two programs with all the history they have is a really cool thing. When Notre Dame plays USC every year, or Texas OU, or obviously Michigan Ohio State, those are huge games, and it is because of the history behind those teams and behind that rivalry. So I don't necessarily have an issue with that. But at the end of the day, Georgia against Florida is awesome. Ole Miss playing LSU is awesome. Penn State playing Michigan or Ohio State is incredible. So it's not necessarily like this end-all be-all that if you're not in a game with a blue blood in it, it doesn't mean anything, or it's not as important. But overall, I fully understand why we lean on blue bloods as aggressively. I fully understand why this is a big topic of conversation, because college football, as much as any sport, is about history. I think right behind baseball, because baseball is just ridiculous, but college football is about history, and celebrating the programs like Nebraska with Tommy Frazier and doing just ridiculous things for so many years definitely deserves a lot of respect and deserves to be in this group. I'm just saying the group doesn't necessarily mean all that much when you lace them up on Saturdays. The group doesn't mean that much when you meet a Georgia player in the hole, because he's going to dominate you. That's just the reality. So I do think it's one of those things that maybe, it helps out being a blue blood, because they're blue blood for a reason. The recruiting footprints, the revenue, the brand, all of those things do matter when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to building up who you are. But it doesn't change that other programs can do it all the same. Georgia has done it over the last couple of years. Oregon's in the process of doing it. Penn State is trying to get up into this conversation and is likely the team that I think is just on the outside, would likely be the 9 there, maybe the 10 behind Georgia, but it's splitting hairs at that point. Overall, there are a ton of teams that are huge in college football history. There are so many teams, whether you're talking about Florida State, or you're talking about Tennessee, or Penn State, or Georgia, or whoever, that aren't blue bloods. And I understand that there are a certain group that are just a little bit above the pack, that have defined the sport for quite some time and over the past, 100 years, but it doesn't change that over the next 5 years, I'd much rather have Georgia or Oregon situation than the majority of the blue bloods that I had in the earlier part of the segment. So I do love that we have blue bloods. I love the conversation. I love that we celebrate these programs that have been so important to the sport. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily matter. It's a really cool title, but honestly, nothing really more. But overall, it's a very interesting conversation every year. It's one of those times of years where we're just itching for football. We want someone to hit someone so bad that we get into these conversations that I think are a little bit goofy, but at the end of the day, it is thought-provoking. It is very interesting to talk about, and overall, Blue blood is very, very fun to talk about. Doesn't necessarily mean too much. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people covering every single sport you could possibly want. In fact, we have my guy Kenneth coming up right after me, so if you want to stick around and watch him, definitely do that. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.